Assalamu alaikum, Hassan.
Waalaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.
Okay, my guest today, right now, at this moment, is Hassan Newaz. He's been active in the Dawah scene for the past 20 years, him and his whole family, beautiful
Alhamdulillah.
family, working tirelessly for the Muslim Ummah here in Canada and globally, but a lot of work in the GTA. Alhamdulillah. And he wears many hats. One of them is he's on the board of directors for National Zakat Foundation Canada. And though I think you're involved in some of that work right now, and I think we're come at a kind of tipping point, in our identity as a society here, as an ummah here in North America and in many Western areas, about the concept of waqfs. So let's start there, and maybe you can give us your understanding of what is a waqf, and maybe that can be something where we can start, and we'll take it from there.
A waqf Islamically is a concept where you set up a fund of sorts or a property or something that has been endowed. Once you make it this endowment, when the donor makes that endowment, that waqf serves in perpetuity for the community. So any income that comes out of this waqf, this endowment, if you will go towards benefiting whatever cause this was designated for, right?
Like, for example, if some really wealthy individual or group of wealthy individuals kind of put together a trust fund,
Yeah,
and that trust fund just serves whatever purpose they're
whatever they're
okay.
designated for, right? So it's there. We have a long history in it, right? It's been there since the earliest days of the Muslims' existence, if you will. It served it. So, example, today, right now, even the Indian Waqf. If you combine all the Waqf land that the Indian Waqfs own, is actually the third largest in India, right? So there's two parts to it, of course, as you can understand, right? It's the actual functioning of the Waqf and producing results and returns that can then serve the community, and that returns being dedicated and used properly in the community as well.
What purpose is that waqf? Like, where does it function for us as an ummah? Like, where is the function? What is the impact? What is it there for?
When we are working in assets and this management of assets and so on and so forth, the idea is that it's the revenue you generate takes care of your needs, right? Your salaries, your dependencies, etc., etc. The capital you raise, which you call fundraise, actually, it's supposed to be for capital projects, for investments, for new things to develop. Now, if you take that analogy and apply it in our community today, our community actually raises money to pay for operational expenses.
Mm-hmm.
This is not sustainable, right? We all know that. We always complain about the degree of fundraising sometimes in Ramadan and other things, but these communities have to do it because we don't have an endowment structure set up. Most of the time we're raising money to pay for operational expenses. What should happen instead is that the operational expenses should be covered through revenue or return on these waqfs or endowments, and any new money that we raise should then be invested in capital projects, in the new buildings, and so on and so forth, other things, right? That would be the angle, right? Like to grow the community. I shouldn't say buildings, it depends on the purpose of the building, but the idea is that the growth of the community should come from the fundraising, but the natural need that is there should be sustained by endowments, in my opinion.
And what's the benefit of that, as opposed to, like, well, I'm raising money every year because some people have gotten really good at fundraising and they raise funds and they're getting better, as opposed to just saying, like, what, we just need to raise funds better. What is this? What is this really giving us as an advantage?
I think the advantage is that you can actually plan for growth, right? You can actually make that, you're not looking over your shoulder to make sure that your current OPEX is covered. You can actually strategize and look at the future, look at the long term, and plan for it. And then that's exactly what happened in our history, right? Because most of the endowments that were there in place were for education, were for poverty alleviation, were for taking care of needy of different time. Medical hospitals were endowed. Al-Azhar is a famous example of endowment, right?
Oh, subhanAllah.
SubhanAllah, it's been endowed for a long time, right? And that's how that money generates, and that's how it would do. To the extent, that is one of the reasons also the government got involved in Egypt to take over, because Al-Azhar maintained a huge independence because they were self-funded. They didn't have to worry, right? Again, I don't want to get into the politics of it necessarily, but this is one of the reasons a lot of governments nationalized waqfs, because waqfs carried so much asset and so much income that it gave independence to the strategic needs, to be focusing on the strategic needs of the community. The model is appropriate for a new community, and that is absolutely fair. Actually, I want to be fair to our people before us and so on and so forth, because they set us up to now think about this next level or next engagement. So a lot of people are looking at this concept seriously, and that speaks to the maturity of the community. The community is now ready to turn that corner, and a lot of different people are looking at it, right? They may have different focuses. They may want their endowments to work on granting money in different areas, and that's natural and that's fair. But that is what is, slowly happening. So that kind of speaks to it. To date, I know of 1 or 2 Waqfs that exist. Some are within masajid structures
in North America, in Canada.
In Canada.
Oh wow!
Right? Yeah.
Okay.
There is a smaller community I know of where the masjid has a number of properties, and that income is kind of designated for endowment, and that money then comes back and feeds the needs of the masjid. So there are some setups like that. Along with it, there is another foundation that has been running for a number of years, taking care of niche needs of the community, and they've been operating for a number of years now. So those 2 I know of, but I think there's a number of them that are now going to come out and actually focus on different areas of need and sort of address that. And I think that would be very good for it. The other thing I want to also mention for endowments, and I think we were talking about that a little earlier, is that when we were younger, we used to always talk about masjids and other Islamic institutions, saying that why don't they have some sort of revenue generating model? Why don't they generate revenue? Why don't they take care of their thing? Why do they have to fundraise like this? We all have probably complained about the 27th night fundraising,
Yes.
instead of ibadah, why are we doing this? And then trying to say, no, this is also ibadah, and so on and so forth. But the key takeaway there is that we're expecting people who are dedicated to serving a different cause to all of a sudden build and develop a new skill set. That is to run a business.
Right. When they're taking care of the masjid
Yeah,
and figuring out like what they're programming, basketball, youth night.
And then
now they gotta run
a business. Running a business is not easy. Most people, I would struggle with running a business. I can do a few investments, but running a business takes a lot of things. So instead, in the endowment model, you are asking these endowments to be, I don't want to say multi-purpose, but whatever their purpose is they're dedicated to, they will have the right professionals who are into building that money, into growing that capital, getting it, asset managers, whatever they're going to, investment managers, if you will. It depends on the phase that Waqf is in.
Right.
That's also a thing, right? Waqfs in the early years mostly do public equity investments, right? So they just have to do, they will figure out the Sharia compliance of stocks and so on and so forth and invest in it, or invest in REITs, right? Things that are, because remember, endowment is public money still, so you can't do high risk investments with it.
Right.
You have to sort of protect it, take care of it, and then take that money, make sure it turns around 5%, 10%, whatever that threshold is, and then give that back to the community, because you're obliged to do that, right? Especially if you're a foundation.
Right.
So that's kind of the thing we want to do. But the point is, you want that specialization to reside with these endowments, because they are designed and built, and they're going to probably be staffed. If not staffed, they will be supported by individuals who know investment management or asset management or into real estate, but they have that, let them do it, then get that returned revenue and supply it to these organizations that need it, right? They don't need to, necessarily decide or do the community projects themselves. They can give the money to these other organizations, and I think that should be the focus.
Okay. And do you feel like it's something that these organizations just should? I'm trying to imagine, like, okay, how do you catalyze this? Like, I know there are people already working on it, right? I don't think it's generally in the population psyche just yet. That this
Not
is
yet.
This is the
Yeah.
way. You mean to say, like, people aren't thinking, okay, you know what? I'm going to get into with my degree. After that, I'm going to join a Waqf, because I mean, it's not. It's not in people's minds that's where they're going to go.
I think we're getting to a starting point, because again, I do some again that's not my area of full expertise, but I do a little bit of conversation around just investing, Sharia compliant investing, and so on and so forth. But one thing I will tell you, in this last 2-3 years that I have been trying to do that, or help people out, or help myself out even, there's a huge amount of Muslims who are thinking about investments, thinking about how to get a return on investment, right? Not just as a, just as savings anymore, right? Before it used to be just put the money in the bank and hopefully it goes to a certain point. People are thinking about all of these tools, whether it's public equity investments or other things, or REITs and so on and so forth, which speaks to them understanding that in their personal life that the money has to keep functioning or growing or working for them. So if you're expecting that on the individual side, I honestly think that it will be easy. I don't know. I'm hoping it will be easy to sort of also convince them that even for the not-for-profits or for these charitable objectives that we have, we should also be doing the same thing. So instead of just giving your money to be spent on that cause, maybe 10% of that, maybe 20% of that should be put away and invested so that over time we can build that capacity and we can build that return, right?
Mhm.
So you don't need the full thing. I don't think in one shot you're going to move the whole thing over,
Yeah.
but it is a gradual process
Because
where people start
that's
thinking
what I
about
was
it.
thinking about. Like, when you mentioned that, is this the wealth of one or two individuals? But if you're talking about publicly, there has to be kind of like this mindset that says, when I'm going to invest, Waqf is part of that thinking or that portfolio.
Yeah,
That's
when
what
I'm going to
looking-
give.
Yeah,
I think it's when I'm going to give,
What I'm going
right?
to give. Yeah.
When I'm going to give, I'm going to take a portion and put it to these endowments of my choices, right? And I think that's how we need to sort of educate folks on it. They're doing it in their personal space, right? Most of the folks have investment managers, particularly folks who are, with a lot of wealth. But even everyone, in fact, I know everyone who's working is trying to do RRSPs, TFSs, etc. If you're doing that for that, I'm assuming you would want the not-for-profits to also have that, or the charitable organizations to also have that ability.
So people in general should be thinking about this as a sadaqah, like as an act of giving or an act of.
It is an act of giving.
Okay.
The great thing of it is an act of giving that actually is sadaqah jariyah. Sorry,
Oh, wow.
I know. Let's break that out a little bit. I'm not saying the other stuff are not sadaqah jariyah.
Yeah.
Anything with intention that you wish to give that is for the long term is sadaqah jariyah. We all understand that.
Mhm.
But if you're looking at it from the functioning aspect of a sadaqah jariyah, what is that? It would be a sadaqah that continues, right?
Mhm.
So this is a sadaqah that continues because you give that $1,000. That $1,000 never decreases. The $1,000 does not go away,
Mhm.
right? The $1,000 stays invested out of the return of that investment, whether it is that $100 you got back or the $50 you got back. That's what gets spent on the charitable cause.
Mhm.
If you can show that picture, I think it will resonate with people.
Right.
So it's a functional sadaqah jariyah. It is, because the money never shrinks. Like, that's the job of that endowment, to protect that money, make it inflation proof, and get that return and use that return for public good.
Okay, so this would be something that do you say that it is, does it liabilities, or is it a critical path, like, to have the population support it, or can it be started with just like a few people, as in it can just go?
As with anything good out there, it has to start with a few people.
Okay.
That's, you don't have to wait for a critical mass for it. I think when the critical mass comes on, that's when it's going to be successful, right? But I think some people have to start the journey, and that's where some of us are. And again, when I was doing this and with a few other brothers, and I went and had a lot of conversation, and I have a great respect for a lot of the other brothers that I know. Some of them told me, hey, you know what? I actually think we need to wait until we have a Muslim of this dollar value,
Really? Okay.
right? Before we do this, because if he can drop, 1%, or if he drops 0.5%, that will be enough to start a big Waqf, right?
Mhm.
So we need to get to that threshold. Some of us said, you know what? We'll take the harder approach right now.
Mhm.
Let's start working on
Get
it.
some traction.
Let's get some traction on it, and maybe Allah knows best if we are going to be able to make that benefit happen for people. But there may be someone else who comes later than us, who does a better job, who makes that thing more, makes it workable, or hits the right time point and does it better. So, but we have to start. You cannot hold off and wait for these things, because we all know that the need is there.
It's like building a masjid, and then somebody else builds another better masjid. Okay, awesome.
It's possible as long as there is utility.
Right.
And I mean, if you look at if you just do very rough calculations, right? Our community's need is it's about 15 million, right? That's the need. At an endowment level, to get to that need is going to take a long time, right? Because you're making 5% return only.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe 10% at best,
Yeah,
right?
So because it's very conservative.
Exactly, it's
Yeah.
very conservative. You have to protect the people's money in this process, right? So if you're going to do that, there's a lot of need. We need a lot of players involved in this, and a lot of I will invite even people who are well established and they're very good at fundraising, etc., to also get involved in the game, because maybe they will make it better.
Right. So right now there were a couple notable. Well, you mentioned, because I know you're involved in I Endow,
Yeah.
right? And maybe there are a couple other notable things. Maybe you want to tell me about Endow, and then maybe you can
Yeah.
think of,
So
other things we might know about.
yeah, iEndow is an endowment that we've sort of set up. It functions like a community. It's a charitable foundation, right? So that's how it has been set up with CRA and so on and so forth.
Right.
The idea is to ultimately the end objective is to grant money for projects that sort of work for our future generation, right? There's
Such as
so there are three streams we broadly defined. So one is edu training, so education training related to our future generation, our youth, our children. So it could be a school, it could be those kind of things, it could be courses, it could be a leadership program. Those elements in one bucket. Another one is about health and wellness for children and youth and so on. So mental health, things like, I mean, again, just as an example, Nasiha, those kind of projects,
Right.
Again, they may not need it today, but at one point in time, they would have probably needed that kind of support. So
Right.
granting money for those kind of areas. And then the last one is social entrepreneurship. So if there are young people interested in setting up endeavors that would sort of help and help, because they're going to come with new ideas, they're going to come with a new outlook. We want to see if we can help and fund this thing. Again, no different from other
in your philosophy on choosing those three. How did
again, consultations, people came together who were involved in the thing. We had social workers, we had psychology, because we went to people saying, okay, we want to do the Waqf thing, some of us, but if we take this future generation thing, what are those pillars? So one of the advice we got is that, again, you don't have to cover everything. Choose some focus areas and then try to make sure your money is doing the work for you, right? The returns are going to be effective, because that's what is needed. Even for grant applications, etc., that would be good, especially because we're starting off new. Once you hit that community foundation level and you have like 100 million, 200 million, you can have the broader conversation about opening up and doing other things. But right now, start somewhere, and those three areas came back as feedback from some of those people we consulted in terms of what is the need out there for future generation folks. What does that need look like, right? And some of those broad areas were things, we bucketed them, and then we kind of sliced and diced until we got to that point.
Okay. And did you use any people references for other people who are doing something similar when you set up the way you were doing it, or like I'm trying to think of like what else is out there that's, that you know of that
in the Muslim community space, as I told you, there are foundations that serves or funds masjids and stuff like that. They've been set up like that. So I know of one of those like that.
Right.
The other one that I know of, I think, was generally more social work funding. Right.
Okay.
So they were a little bit more broader. They were open ended, because I've gone to a few meetings for them a few years ago, and that's kind of the alignment they had, where they were funding people coming to them with small projects, and they will fund them, help them out, etc. So there wasn't a lot of reference, but what is there is that if you look at the community out there, the broader community out there, you see endowments serving all spaces. If you were in university, I'm sure like all of us have been in university, but if you went to university, you applied for a bursary, likely that bursary came from a foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. That's what it was. Someone came in and said, you know what, here is my money. I want this given in my mom's name. I want this given in my dad's name.
Yeah.
And that was the bursary. And you may have then said, okay, this is the area, this is the type of student I want fund. So, they have there's a plethora of example there. My personal view is ultimately we are going to need community foundations as well, right? Things that are a little bit more broader, even things like Trillium Foundation. We talk about it all the time. They're always granting money. They've been very kind to the Muslim community, but the whole point is that those type of foundations need to exist, right? So I think that
by the Muslim community for the Muslim
that should exist by the Muslim community for the Muslim community at the onset, and then let's see how it grows. Maybe we should be doing it for the broader community as well, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
But I think we have a serious need in terms of fixing. I shouldn't say fixing. Going to the next level. I think that's a better way of looking at it, because again, we wouldn't be able to do this if the efforts that already came before us didn't happen, right?
Right. Yeah.
And we acknowledge that.
No, 100%. So the future, like when you think about, like, that vision, when you have these endowments, their function, what do you see that in terms of its transformative power within the Ummah in Canada, for example? Like, where do you see its impacts if you were to dream about its impact and envision its impacts?
And praying for that day when, all of these Muslim efforts and organizations are worry free in terms of their operational expenses. You need you have budgeted for, you have planned for 200K, and there are endowments that are backing you, serving you, maybe multiple endowments sharing a portion of this thing, and they're also ensuring accountability because they're granting you money, so you have accountability to deliver on, and you're delivering on them, and all of those need is taken care of. And any new money that you actually fundraise is for growth, is for doing something new, it's for enhancing something, it's for covering. So that's how I would look at it. I'm a very functional type of person. I apologize, so it's not maybe as visual and thing, but for me, this need is what holds people back. Is this salary considerations, is this constraints. You have conversations and people are like, well, we can't really pay him anymore, he needs to go somewhere else, he cannot stay in the organization anymore. This happens so often. You have this conversation.
We're at that point where there's such professional talent coming into Muslim NGOs, right?
Yeah.
That are working locally, or could be some niche area, could be some community focus, could be a masjid, could be whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they're there for a bit, as long as they can bring themselves to be there.
Yeah.
And then they're exhausted and they have to kind of move on because we don't have the capacity, to meet that kind of professionalism, because the market's driving rates that
the market drives rates, and also this whole perpetual nature of I'm going to fundraise. And even if you were working in it, like I tried this, so at some point you're like, you know what, if I'm raising my own salary in this way, it becomes it eats away at you. It might. It may eat away. I really think people should not think like that, honestly, because they are doing stuff fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah, so on and so forth. I don't want them to think that, but people do. The reality, if the endowments were backing all of these organizations, that would just be a very different conversation.
But it's a matter of specialization, in the sense that, like you said, like some of these people, like if there's an imam, like his function is to kind of, be the imam for the community. Fundraising isn't necessarily his, his
but you know what the funny thing is, I've seen enough job descriptions of imams where that is the specific criteria mentioned.
Fundraise for your own salary, right?
Yeah, and getting fired as well for those kind of not doing fundraising. And I know so many imams that have left and said, you know what, I would rather just have a normal job and life because I can't do this. It doesn't feel right. But the reality of it is that if you really want to increase that capacity in our community, we have to make these organizations worry-free on that count.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no disrespect intended. They don't need to do that then. Let these endowments and people, again, that endowment space will also evolve. I'm sure there are going to be difficulties and challenges and people are going to learn from it, etc. But ultimately, I think we will have those solutions in place where things are funded right. Just like, by the way, all of these major institutions, along with tuition and so on and so forth, universities, etc. All universities have endowed funds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's how you're supposed to do, right? But ask me, how many Islamic schools do?
No law,
right? So you need that, because even though you get tuition, it's never enough.
Right.
And look at how many. So if you take even Islamic schools, same challenge. They need that additional thing.
Right.
And you can't go fundraise for it's difficult. My kids go to Islamic school, and I've seen that where they come back in Ramadan with this thing. You guys have to raise this much money, and you're going to people saying, we need to raise money for my school, but my kid goes to that school. Like, what? What is going on here?
No,
right?
it has to be very confusing.
It is very confusing,
and I think disillusioning.
It is hard.
Yeah,
but they're trying to do a good thing, and they don't know any other way.
100%.
Right? So I think that's kind of what we are dreaming here about. Is that that's why I'm open. For me, it's all of these areas.
I can see the promise of it is to decouple these two functions.
You
guys do what you're good at. Educate my kids.
Yes.
Don't worry about the money.
Exactly. and to be honest, if you take that further, if you look at some of our advocacy organizations, some of our organizations that are at the front of the battle, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things you might have noticed is that they are constantly challenged because they don't have the funding for it. They are actually at the same time as deploying that money, they're raising that money.
Absolutely.
That is incribly difficult.
Yeah.
Those of us who have done any sort of fundraising, you're raising money and you're spending it, and then you don't know it. This is an incredible challenge we have put on them. It's because the community hasn't given them that next level, and the community needs to. Ultimately, even these organizations should be funded from endowments. There should be endowments set up, whatever the legal structure is needed, because I know it's complicated, it's advocacy and all of these kind of things, but ultimately other communities have done it, and we need to maybe study some of that modeling and see how they have done it, how they have achieved it, and ensure that we have the structure set up for it, because these organizations should be specialized and focused on driving outcomes for us on all of those files, whether it is Islamophobia, whether it is even the Palestine issue for sure, right? And so on and so forth. And, not be worried about where their next paycheck is going to come from.
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that, we've heard in the past year, all these particular issues that are very important to the Muslim community. There's a lot of advocacy, a lot of work, not just the advocacy, but all the implementation, all the groundwork needs to happen. And then, they'll come around, it's like, it takes money.
Yeah, it takes money.
It takes money. And we're doing the work, and then we have to go ask you for the money too. It's
and
it's
that will,
difficult. It's difficult.
It is difficult.
It takes away from doing the work. 100%.